The battlefield stretched as far as the eye could see, a frozen expanse littered with the charred remnants of ships, fallen soldiers, and shattered machinery. The once proud alien coalition forces, a diverse assembly of species united in their desperate struggle against the Zarnath Empire, now lay broken. Their advanced technology had proven inadequate against the relentless and methodical brutality of their foe. What was left of their armies retreated under a sky thick with ash and smoke, their morale as fractured as the icy ground beneath their feet. General Valen of the Gorthon, a towering figure with 4 angular arms and bioluminescent markings that pulsed erratically with fear, surveyed the carnage from a makeshift command outpost. His voice, a low, resonant hum, wavered as he addressed the remaining council of allied leaders. "We cannot sustain this. Our worlds burn, our people scatter. The Zarnath have exploited every weakness in our ranks. We are finished." The council room, a hollowed-out chamber in the icy cliffs, fell silent. Faces from a dozen alien species reflected a shared despair. Ambassador Thrix, a feathered avianian known for her unshakable optimism, sat hunched, her once proud plumage dulled. "We've tried everything," she whispered, her voice brittle. "Diplomacy, subterfuge, even full-frontal assaults. They anticipate us at every turn." The silence deepened, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery. Finally, a voice spoke, cutting through the gloom like a blade. "You haven't tried us." All heads turned. Standing at the chamber's edge were 3 humans, their silhouettes sharp against the glow of the dim lighting. At their center was Colonel Elias Kane, his expression as cold and unyielding as the tundra outside. His companions, Major Lynn Calder and Captain Marcus Holt, flanked him, their eyes scanning the room with a predator's calm. The humans' arrival had been a controversial decision, a last-ditch effort debated fiercely among the coalition leaders. Humanity had been a reluctant member of the alliance, its history of ruthless pragmatism earning both fear and respect. Valen's markings flared briefly with irritation. "You expect us to believe that your kind can succeed where entire fleets have failed." Kane stepped forward, his boots crunching on the frosted floor. "What you fail to understand," he began, his voice measured and precise, "is that you've been fighting this war on their terms. The Zarnath are stronger, faster, and more advanced. But they're not invincible. They've never faced an enemy willing to do whatever it takes to win. That's where we come in." The Rix recoiled slightly. "You mean to say that we haven't been ruthless enough? Do you hear yourself, human? We are fighting for survival, not annihilation." Kane's gaze didn't waver. "Survival is annihilation if it's the enemy's survival over yours. Your restraint has cost you. Your morals, while admirable, are a luxury you can no longer afford." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We don't fight fair. We fight to win." The room erupted into a cacophony of protests. The Avianian ambassador's feathers bristled, while a reptilian strategist hissed in disapproval. Only Valen remained silent, his piercing gaze fixed on Kane. Slowly, he raised one of his 4 hands, silencing the others. "Human," he said, his voice heavy with skepticism, "if we grant you the control you demand, how do you intend to turn this tide?" Kane's lips curled into a faint smile. "First, by taking command of your scattered forces. You have power, but no cohesion. Second, by embracing tactics the Zarnath won't expect and won't recover from. Guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, sacrifices that will hurt now, but ensure survival later." The Rix shook her head. "Sacrifices? You speak as though lives are mere numbers to be traded." "They are," Kane said bluntly. "If losing 100 saves 1,000, you make the trade. If destroying a city denies the enemy a stronghold, you make the call. This is war. The Zarnath understand that. It's time you did too." The silence that followed was palpable, broken only by the distant echo of a collapsing structure outside. Valen leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the humans. And what guarantee do we have that your methods won't destroy us in the process? You don't, Kane replied. But you're out of options. The Zarnath aren't going to stop. You've seen what they do to their conquered worlds. Enslavement if they're lucky, annihilation if they're not. You asked us to come here because you knew, deep down, that we were your last chance. Now you need to decide. Will you let us do what needs to be done? Or will you keep playing by rules the enemy doesn't follow? The room held its breath as Valen closed his 4 eyes in thought. When he opened them again, their glow was steadier. Very well, he said, his voice a reluctant growl. We will give you your chance, humans. But understand this. If your actions jeopardize the survival of this coalition, we will not hesitate to remove you. Kane inclined his head. Fair enough. With that, the humans turned and left, their footsteps fading into the corridor beyond. In their wake, the council room seemed colder, the air heavier. The Rix shuddered, folding her wings tightly against her body. Valen, she murmured, have we just invited death to our doorstep? Valen stared at the doorway, his markings dim but steady. Perhaps, he said softly, but it may be the only way to keep it from stepping through. Far outside, the wind howled over the desolate landscape, carrying with it the faint sounds of battle. Humanity's war machines were already mobilizing, their harsh engines a promise of what was to come. The war was about to change, and so was the galaxy. The Zarnath were confident. They had seen the ragged remnants of the coalition forces retreat, had counted the fractured armies as beaten and scattered. What they hadn't counted on was humanity. As the first wave of human forces descended upon an icy moon at the edge of the contested sector, the Zarnath assumed it was another desperate, doomed assault. It took them less than a day to realize they were wrong. The attack began with silence, no blaring sirens or dramatic fleet formations. Instead, the human forces infiltrated the Zarnath supply depot with surgical precision. Small strike teams, clad in adaptive camouflage suits, moved undetected through the dense fog. They disabled critical infrastructure, fuel lines, power grids, and communication relays before the Zarnath even knew they were there. When the first explosions ripped through the depot, the Zarnath scrambled to respond, only to find themselves isolated, their troops divided and disoriented. Colonel Kane watched from a nearby ridge, his expression unreadable as the Zarnath defenses collapsed under the chaos. Major Calder stood beside him, her voice calm but tinged with a hint of admiration. They didn't see it coming. They won't, Kane replied. That's the point. The Zarnath had expected brute force, the kind of straightforward tactics they had crushed countless times before. Instead, humanity brought something new to the battlefield: unpredictability. Where the coalition had relied on structured engagements and rigid strategies, humanity thrived on chaos. They adapted, improvised, and struck where the Zarnath least expected. The victory on the icy moon was only the beginning. Word spread quickly among the coalition forces. The humans were leading the fight now, and they were winning. But their methods were unlike anything the coalition had seen or condoned. In the following weeks, humanity's unconventional tactics turned the tide of the war. On a desert planet, human engineers converted abandoned mining equipment into makeshift artillery, using the planet's sandstorms as cover to ambush Zarnath convoys. On a forested world, they rigged entire swaths of jungle with explosives, turning the terrain itself into a weapon. The Zarnath, for all their technological superiority, struggled to predict humanity's next move. The alien coalition, however, was not entirely comfortable with these victories. The first real confrontation came after the siege of Vorik, a once thriving industrial colony that had been occupied by the Zarnath for months. Humanity's plan to liberate the colony was brutally effective. They bombarded the city's perimeter, cutting off supply lines and forcing the Zarnath into a defensive position. Then, under the cover of night, human commandos infiltrated the city and detonated key infrastructure, collapsing entire districts to trap the enemy within. When the smoke cleared, The Zarnath forces had been wiped out, but so had much of the city. Coalition leaders arrived to survey the aftermath and were horrified by the destruction. Ambassador Therix, her feathers singed from the ash-filled air, confronted Cain directly. "This is liberation," she demanded, her voice sharp with anger. "You've reduced Vorik to rubble. Thousands of civilians are homeless, and the city will take decades to rebuild." Cain met her gaze, unflinching. "And how many civilians would be alive if the Zarnath had stayed?" "We saved lives, Ambassador. You just don't like how we did it." Therix's feathers bristled, but she had no retort. Cain's argument was cold, but it was also irrefutable. The Zarnath left no survivors in their conquests. Vorik's people, for all their losses, were still breathing. Not all in the coalition were willing to accept such reasoning. Tensions began to simmer as humanity's methods grew more ruthless. Reports filtered in of scorched earth tactics. Human forces abandoning allied planets they deemed strategically irrelevant, even going so far as to sabotage resources to deny them to the Zarnath. The coalition's leaders convened multiple times to discuss whether humanity's approach was too dangerous, but the results spoke for themselves. For every world lost, 2 were reclaimed. For every questionable tactic, there was a decisive victory. Among the human ranks, not all were as resolute as Cain. Captain Marcus Holt, a rising officer known for his tactical brilliance, began to question the cost of their actions. After the battle on Vorik, he confronted Major Calder in the dim confines of their command post. "Do you ever wonder if we're becoming the thing we're fighting?" Holt asked, his voice low but firm. Calder, adjusting the display on a holographic map, didn't look up. "We're nothing like the Zarnath. They conquer. We survive." Holt frowned. "At what point does survival stop being worth it?" Vorik wasn't just a victory, it was a massacre. I've seen soldiers in our ranks start to enjoy this. The killing, the destruction. That's not what I signed up for. Calder paused, her eyes narrowing. "You signed up to win, Captain. Or have you forgotten what's at stake? The Zarnath don't leave survivors. They don't negotiate. If we start second-guessing ourselves now, we might as well hand them the galaxy." Holt didn't reply, but the unease in his expression lingered. Calder returned to her work, though her usual confidence was tinged with something harder to place, perhaps doubt, or perhaps the realization that Holt's concerns were not unfounded. As the war progressed, humanity's influence over the coalition grew. Alien commanders began adopting human tactics, reluctantly abandoning their ideals in favor of survival. The Gorthan, once known for their honor-bound approach to combat, started employing ambush strategies. The Avianians, renowned for their precision strikes, began deploying decoys and misinformation campaigns. The coalition was changing, and not everyone was convinced it was for the better. The Zarnath, meanwhile, were struggling. For the first time, they faced an enemy that fought like they did, without mercy or hesitation. Reports from the front lines spoke of Zarnath commanders abandoning posts, their morale shattered by humanity's relentless assaults. Entire fleets were retreating to defend their core worlds, their aura of invincibility crumbling under the weight of human ingenuity. Still, the cost of victory weighed heavily on all sides. Cain stood alone in a command bunker, studying the latest reports from the front lines. The coalition was winning, but the strain on its members was beginning to show. The question loomed over every decision he made. How far was too far? For now, there was no answer, only the grim reality that the war was not yet over. The Zarnath would not surrender easily, and humanity was just getting started. The Zarnath homeworld loomed on the horizon, a dark jewel surrounded by massive orbital defenses. It was their last bastion, the beating heart of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for decades. For humanity and the coalition forces, this was the endgame. The galaxy watched with bated breath as the combined fleets gathered in the shadow of the enemy's stronghold. Victory here would mean survival. Failure would mean extinction. Colonel Kane stood in the command center of the flagship Resolute, his face illuminated by the cold glow of tactical displays. Around him, a mix of human officers and alien strategists monitored the fleet's preparations. The tension in the air was palpable, a heavy silence, broken only by the faint hum of machinery. Kane's voice cut through it like a blade. "We've come too far to falter now. The Zarnath are cornered, and they know it. They'll fight like animals, but that doesn't change the outcome. We will take their homeworld." Major Calder, standing at his side, nodded. "The orbital defenses are formidable, but our intelligence suggests weaknesses in their coordination. If we can disrupt their central command hub, the entire system will collapse." Kane's eyes flicked to Captain Holt, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since the briefing began. "Thoughts, Captain?" Holt hesitated, then stepped forward. "It's a solid plan. But what happens after? If we push them to the brink and destroy their homeworld, do we risk turning them into martyrs? What's to stop the remnants of their forces from waging a never-ending insurgency?" Kane's expression hardened. "That's not our concern right now. The Zarnath don't deserve the luxury of survival. They've razed entire civilizations, wiped out entire species. This ends here." Holt didn't respond immediately. His jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod. The conversation ended there, but the unease lingered in the room like a specter. The battle began with precision strikes, humanity's hallmark. Waves of stealth bombers slipped past the Zarnath perimeter, disabling key defense platforms with pinpoint accuracy. Coalition ships surged forward in their wake, engaging the Zarnath fleet in brutal dogfights. Alien ships fought alongside human ones, their once fractured forces now a cohesive unit forged by desperation and necessity. On the ground, the fighting was even fiercer. Humanity's soldiers, equipped with adaptive exosuits and armed with the Coalition's finest weapons, led the charge. They hit the Zarnath defenses like a storm, their relentless assaults forcing the enemy to retreat deeper into their citadel. The Coalition forces followed, their combined strength overwhelming even the Zarnath's vaunted elite. Amid the chaos, Captain Holt found himself leading a strike team through the labyrinthine corridors of the Zarnath Command Center. His orders were clear: disable their central communication array, the key to coordinating the planet's defenses. But as they advanced, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The deeper they went, the more resistance they encountered. Holt's team moved with the efficiency of seasoned veterans, taking down enemies with practiced precision. Yet the Zarnath seemed almost desperate. Their attacks were erratic, their movements disorganized. It wasn't the calculated resistance Holt had expected. "Sir," one of his soldiers said, her voice crackling over the comms. "We've got something strange up ahead. A lot of activity, but no heavy defenses. Almost like they want us to get through." Holt frowned, his unease deepening. "Stay sharp. Something doesn't feel right." When they finally breached the command center, the sight that greeted them froze them in their tracks. The room was vast, its walls lined with pulsating machinery. At its center was a massive Zarnath, its body augmented with cybernetic enhancements. It was tethered to the machinery around it, its glowing eyes fixed on the intruders. "You've come far, humans," it said, its voice a deep, resonant growl. "But you miscalculated. Do you think victory here will save you? Do you think it will end the bloodshed?" Holt raised his weapon, but the Zarnath didn't flinch. "You've become like us," it continued, its voice filled with a mixture of disdain and amusement. "Merciless, ruthless. What will you do when there's no enemy left to fight? Will you turn on each other? Or will you turn on those you claim to protect?" Holt hesitated. His finger hovered over the trigger, but the creature's words gnawed at him. "You've killed billions," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Don't pretend you're the victim here." The Zarnath chuckled, a hollow, chilling sound. "We are what we are. And now, so are you?" Before Holt could respond, the Zarnath's cybernetic appendages surged to life, triggering a chain reaction. The room began to shake, and alarms blared as the machinery overloaded. Holt's team scrambled to escape, the air thick with smoke and the sound of collapsing structures. The command center erupted in a massive explosion, taking the Zarnath and its secrets with it. Above the planet, the battle reached its climax. The coalition forces, bolstered by humanity's unyielding resolve, broke through the Zarnath fleet. The homeworld's defenses crumbled, and the planet itself burned as orbital bombardments rained down. By the time the dust settled, the Zarnath Empire was no more. The coalition celebrated their victory, but the cost was undeniable. Entire worlds lay in ruin, and countless lives had been lost. Humanity, hailed as the saviors of the war, now stood at the forefront of the galaxy's future. Yet the scars of the conflict ran deep, and the question of what kind of galaxy they had saved lingered. Colonel Kane, standing alone on the bridge of the Resolute, stared at the smoldering remains of the Zarnath homeworld. The war was over, but his expression betrayed no satisfaction. "We won," Calder said as she approached, her voice quiet. "Isn't that what matters?" Kane didn't look at her. "Winning is the easy part. It's what comes next that's hard." In the days that followed, the coalition began to splinter. Old alliances, held together by the glue of necessity, began to fray. Humanity's methods, once grudgingly accepted, now became a point of contention. Many feared what the humans might do in peacetime, their ruthlessness no longer tempered by the urgency of war. Holt, haunted by the Zarnath's final words, resigned from active duty. He returned to a galaxy still rebuilding, unsure of his place in it. Calder continued to serve, her loyalty to Kane unwavering, though doubt had begun to creep into her heart. Kane himself disappeared from public view, retreating into the shadows as the coalition's fragile unity threatened to collapse. The Zarnath were gone, but their legacy endured, not in their empire, but in the lessons they had left behind. The galaxy had been saved, but at what cost? The war was over, but the question remained. Had humanity's victory come at the price of its soul?